Week 5 running back rankings tier list, top 36 running backs we're going to be going through now in today's video. We're about a month into the season, so we have a lot of good information to go off of. We do have some bye weeks this week, which I'll touch on at the beginning of the video, so we're going to have to dig a little bit deeper, get a little bit more gutsy Malone with it. But if you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Now let's get into it. All right, so I teased it at the top. We do have a couple bye weeks, so this is going to factor into your running back decisions and I'm sure into your flex decisions as well. No Kenneth Walker, no Austin Eckler, no Rashad White, no Jerome Ford or Zach Charbonnet this week. So we got 5 usable running backs out of the rotation, which means we're going to have to go a little bit deeper as far as the will they play tier. So every week I go over some of the major injuries, some of the guys we're expecting to potentially be out for this week's games. Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, and Javonte Williams are the major injury concerns as of now. With Saquon Barkley, he's been a limited participant in practice all week. He is officially listed as questionable with the high ankle sprain he suffered a couple weeks ago. It looks like maybe he's going to try and go for this one, but definitely keep in mind Saquon might be a little limited to some degree. He also is going to be without a couple of his starting offensive linemen in this game as well. So hopefully, maybe they just hold him out one more week, get him fully back to full speed. Jonathan Taylor, we do have listed here as questionable for week 5. He is coming off of the PUP list. For my money, he probably hasn't been really that hurt. It looks like this has been mostly a contract situation. He is expected to play according to NFL Network's Ian Rappaport. So definitely keep that in mind. With Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor, if both guys are a full go, they would be inside my top 15 of this tier list, probably inside my top 12 to 14 rankings of this tier list. And then with Javonte Williams, we do have him questionable for this game with the hip injury that he suffered last week. My money and my guess would be that they hold him out a game, let Jaleel McLaughlin and Samaje Perine take over for this one, but they are a 1-3 football team, so they might want to get their best running back on the field. Nonetheless, those guys are the ones that we're dealing with as far as major injuries. Then when we get into the running back tier list itself, so we have the locked-in running back starts. I always just briefly buzz over the running backs 1 to 12 because, of course, these guys are in your starting lineup each and every week. But as far as who could overperform, who could underperform, we have a couple running backs here with good matchups. Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Travis Etienne, David Montgomery, and Brian Robinson had a good one last night. And then, of course, Devon Achane. Elite running backs in high-scoring games. We have Devon Achane, Travis Etienne, DeAndre Swift, and David Montgomery. And then some guys that could potentially underperform this week because they're in tougher matchups. Christian McCaffrey, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, James Cook, and Aaron Jones. Although these guys are probably in your lineup regardless. Just temper expectations given the matchups that we're looking at for those guys. Usually I like to highlight a guy or two from this tier as well to go over some recent usage trends. With David Montgomery, who is my RB8 in my rankings right now, 34 touches last week against the Packers on Thursday Night Football. He's got to be the guy that you start in this backfield comfortably until we see Jahmyr Gibbs get a bigger role. Because as of right now, Jahmyr Gibbs looks to be kind of just like an ancillary piece of this offense. He also popped up on the injury report with a hamstring injury today. And of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown will probably not be playing on Sunday. So this offense in general is going to be taking a bit of a hit. He virtually owns all of the rushing work inside the 5, inside the 10, and inside the 20-yard line. He's gotten every inside the 5 carry as long as he's been on the field. Of course, he did miss some time, but pretty much anytime he's been out there, he's been the guy that they rely on in the red zone. The Lions are currently implied for 27 points. That might change with the Amon-Ra news. 10-point home favorites, and the over is catching some steam in that game right now against the 30th ranked run defense against the fantasy running back position. So the Carolina Panthers, not a good run defense. The Lions should win that game comfortably. I'd imagine David Montgomery will be a big part of that win. So running back 10 for me, another guy that I want to highlight from this top 12 is Devon Achane, because we did see a shift in the backfield usage last week with him and Raheem Mostert. Am I ready to say it's going to be, it's never going to go back to Mostert? It's going to be all Devon Achane, all gas, no breaks? I mean, not necessarily. I think that game script could have played a bit of a culprit for why the Dolphins had their pass catching back on the field more. They were losing big to the Buffalo Bills, which could be why Devon Achane was out there quite a bit. And I think most of us don't expect the Miami Dolphins to be losing very many games. Nonetheless, he's still the back to start for me here in Miami, which is why I have him inside my top 10 running backs. The Dolphins are implied right now for 30 points, which is the highest on the entire slate. The Giants have been a hot mess for like 7 out of the 8 halves of football that they've played this entire season. Outside of the second half against Arizona, they've pretty much been a no-show. I would not be shocked if the Dolphins boat race them and drop 40 points in this game. And you're going to want pieces of this offense, and Devon Achane is one of the best that you can roll out there this week. Then we get into the high-end RB2s. So those are the top 12 running backs. Those are probably in your lineup. I doubt any of you guys need to determine a start-sit decision between guys in that situation unless you're in a very shallow league. These are going to be more so the guys that we're talking about here. High-end RB2s, Joe Mixon is the first guy that we're going to talk about. RB13 for me in my rankings. Will this be the week that the Bengals figure their shit out? I tend to think it will be because mainly I'm going up against the Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase stack in my home league, and if you guys want some confidence, they haven't done anything all year, and I know for a fact they're going to go off against me. No clue, but in theory, this is a great matchup. The Cardinals have been a run funnel defense as well, so even if Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, if he ends up playing, struggle, we should have a better matchup here for Joe Mixon. They rank third lowest against the fantasy football running back position in adjusted fantasy points allowed and rush defense DVOA combined, which is our matchup metric that we look at. So Joe Mixon's in a really good spot here. Hopefully the offense can figure their shit out. They can get things moving. If they can, I think Joe Mixon will have a pretty good performance there. So running back 14 for me is my start of the week. Breece Hall, running back of the New York Jets, and damn am I excited for Breece Hall this week because we had Robert Saleh, head coach of the Jets, come out and say the training wheels are off. There is no more pitch count for Breece Hall anymore, and there shouldn't be because their run game has been absolutely non-existent outside of the one game that Breece Hall did get a lot of the work against the Buffalo Bills in Week 1, coincidentally the only game they've won this season. So I think they know they need to get this guy more involved in the offense. We did see Zach Wilson show a couple signs of life on Sunday against the Kansas City Chiefs. And you know who hasn't shown any signs of life for this offense? Dalvin Cook. He has not done anything, and Breece Hall needs to be the feature back here. And it looks like the Jets are going to wise up to that notion. Giddy up for Breece Hall. He is in my lineup. As you guys can see, Breece Hall has virtually outplayed Dalvin Cook in every single game as far as like rushing grade and yards per attempt and missed tackles forced. The only game that he was, not at his best was against the New England Patriots, just a 44 PFF rushing grade. Outside of that, he's been virtually everything that you could have asked for, especially for a running back coming off of a torn ACL. So Breece Hall, definitely have him in your lineup as a top 15 running back this week. Running back 15 for me is James Conner. He's still getting a very good workload, although it has declined a little bit in recent weeks. The Cardinals' offense is actually a top 16 unit in DVOA right now. By most metrics, actually, they're an average offense, not the bottom 5 NFL offense we thought they were going to be. And it's good news for James Conner this week because he gets a Bengals defense that is third best against the run, and they have a lot of defensive injuries. I believe Trey Hendrickson's questionable coming into that game. They might be without their top 2 corners, which will help out the Arizona passing game and get James Conner some red zone looks. He's got to be a top 15 back this week, given the workload and given the matchup. And I think you could make the argument that I maybe even have him too low. So especially if the Bengals drop another stink fest on offense, we could get a very good time of possession game out of the Arizona Cardinals. And I actually really like them to potentially steal this game away from the Bengals. Running back 16 for me in my rankings is Isaiah Pacheco. He is so hard to gauge because on one hand, I think he's a screaming sell high because everything suggests that his workload in week 4 was just a fluke. We haven't really seen him get that much receiving work, get that many snaps before. They seem pretty dead set on using a committee approach and using Edwards-Helaire and Jerick McKinnon. But he has looked pretty solid in recent weeks. This game environment is expected to be very high scoring. It's a 53-point over-under against the Vikings, and the Chiefs are implied for nearly 30 points. So Isaiah Pacheco needs to be in your lineup, but if you can get up to a proven superstar using Isaiah Pacheco in a trade deal right now, let's say you can take Isaiah Pacheco plus somebody coming off of a good week, maybe a wide receiver 3 like Gabriel Davis, and go up and buy low on Tony Pollard or Saquon Barkley or hell, Austin Eckler, Jonathan Taylor, even a Travis Etienne type, I would be willing to use Isaiah Pacheco to tier up in a trade package like that. Definitely explore the trade market and see if you can do it because he's getting a good snap share this past week. I just don't know if that's going to be something that keeps up. I think that was, them riding the hot hand, and we're going to see Jerick McKinnon and CEH more involved going forward. Running back 17 for me in my rankings is Kyren Williams, and he saw a little bit of a dip in his usage last week. It didn't really matter. He scored 2 touchdowns, but Something to monitor that Ronnie Rivers was more involved in the offense. And now we have Kyren Williams, who was a little limited in practice throughout the week with a hip injury. You probably have, and I might eat my words on this, probably another week or two before people start to realize that Kyren Williams is an RB2 and not an RB1. He's getting an RB1 workload, but I have a hard time believing a guy that is, averaging 3.8 yards per carry, forcing just 14% missed tackle percentage. I just don't buy that a 194-pound running back who runs in the 4.7s will be a league winner this season. I just don't buy it. I think that eventually the clock will strike midnight on Kyren Williams, and eventually we'll see more of these other backs get involved, or whatever the case is. Maybe he deals with some injuries because he's smaller. It's a tough matchup this week, especially against the Philadelphia Eagles run defense, so I don't think he's a must-start by any means. He has a must-start type of workload, but this is by no means a good matchup. In fact, it's an absolutely brutal matchup. Even though we're expecting a lot of points in this game, I'm not convinced that you need to start Kyren Williams. And again, I could really eat my words for that, but try and sell high on him. See if you can go after a proven stud, like I said, with Pacheco. Maybe you can package both of those two guys together. If you have them as like your RB3 and 4 on your roster, go after a Pollard, go after an Eckler, go after a Jonathan Taylor, somebody like that. So another guy that I think is also a good sell high right now is running back 18 in my rankings for the week, Alvin Kamara. Could Kamara be solid rest of the season? I think he could be an RB2, a guy that gets a big workload and good receiving work. But the 2020 Alvin Kamara is not here anymore. And I think a lot of people will still buy into the name value that Alvin Kamara brings. He's less efficient. He's older. This offense is a Stone Age pony with Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael running the show. This is not the same creative offense that Sean Payton once ran. And Jamal Williams will be back in a week or two. Kendre Miller is a young running back. I think he was a good prospect. He's eventually going to get more acclimated to the NFL. And I don't think this, 75% snap share workload that we saw from Alvin Kamara last week is going to keep up for the entire season. Again, similar to what I just said with Pacheco and Kyren Williams, sell Alvin Kamara for a known stud. Use a bench piece plus Alvin Kamara to get to Saquon, to get to Eckler, to get to Jonathan Taylor. Hell, I would rather have Breece Hall, Devon Achane, or DeAndre Swift straight up over Alvin Kamara rest of the season. He's still an RB2 in this matchup, but it is a tough game against the New England Patriots. They've been pretty strong against the run this season. Now we get into the low-end RB2s. So the next tier of running backs here, of course, it should go without saying, but if anybody is in this tier and you're deciding between them versus anybody I've already talked about, it means that I would play those other guys over anybody from this tier. So running back 19 for me is Alexander Mattison. Similar argument to Isaiah Pacheco for Mattison this week. It's a very good matchup in terms of game environment. The Chiefs have been quite stingy against the run, but Alexander Mattison and the Vikings offense are implied for a lot of points. We saw Cam Akers work into this backfield a little bit, and it definitely does hurt Alexander Madison's bottom line because he goes from like a 75% snap share guy to like a 65. At least that's what we saw last week, and maybe it's even going to go further than that. If we get a barn burner, though, if we get a 35 to 27 type of game, and Madison punches in a touchdown or two, definitely look to cash out on him, maybe sell high on him after this game as well. So this last 4 or 5 guys have just been absolute sell highs. One guy that I don't think is a sell high, if anything, he's a buy high or a buy low still, is Dameon Pierce, who I have at running back 20 on the week right now. He had his best game of the season last week. He had 24 carries. He forced 6 missed tackles last week alone, which is how much he forced prior to last week in the first 3 games combined. The Texans are rolling on offense. C.J. Stroud is playing really well. Nico Collins looks like a number 1 wide receiver. Tank Dell has been an awesome player as well. And that's starting to spill over to Dameon Pierce. The Atlanta Falcons, who is their week 5 opponent this week, they can stop the run pretty well. But I still do like Dameon Pierce as a top 20 play. I think he can get heavily involved in this offense. You guys can see the workload that he's getting. This past week, he finally cracked 65% of the rush attempts. He's finally getting the work that we expect him to get. So running back 21 for me on the week is Ramondre Stevenson. And Ramondre Stevenson is on everybody's panic list right now. And I get it. I understand why people would be panicked about Ramondre Stevenson. And to be honest, I'm a little nervous as well. Not because I think he's going to lose work to Ezekiel Elliott or because he's going to get benched or, sidetracked or whatever. But the guy has played really poorly so far this season. In every game except for the Miami Dolphins game, he had a PFF grade in the 60s or lower. He just doesn't look like he did last year. He looked like one of the better running backs in the NFL last year. And hopefully it's just a slow start and maybe it's due to this thigh injury that he's dealing with, why he doesn't look 100% or why he doesn't look as spry as he did last year. And the Patriots offense has also been quite bad as well. But I do think they can figure it out. I mean, we're talking about Bill Belichick here. Even if Mac Jones had to get benched, Bailey Zappi is pretty much the same type of quarterback. Maybe he gives them a little bit of juice. I lean on the side of buying low on Ramondre Stevenson because I think he's at a basement price tag right now more than like selling low, because I think nobody's going to give you what he's actually worth, which is, in my opinion, still a back-end RB2 rest of the season. It's not RB1 production like we maybe expected from him at the beginning of the year, but I do think he's still like a mid RB2, low-end RB2 for the rest of the year. And if you have him, I would recommend that you hold. The Saints and Patriots are both mediocre teams. He should have a decent game in this one, and then the Patriots' schedule actually opens up a little bit for Ramondre Stevenson. So if he has a good game this week, maybe ride him out for another week or two after that, and then you could probably sell high on him in week 7 or week 8 after he has a couple good games strung together. So running back 22 in my rankings here is Raheem Mostert. And as I mentioned with Devon Achane, I can keep this brief. I'm not certain this backfield will stay Devon Achane getting 65% of the snaps. I think it will probably be closer to a 50-50 timeshare week over week, pending whatever the game script is. And most of the time, I expect the Dolphins to be winning games. So Raheem Mostert should be able to carve out a good number of carries. Even if Devon Achane is getting 15, 20 opportunities a game, we should expect that Raheem Mostert gets, 13, 14, 17 carries on any given week. The Giants are absolute cheeks, man. And Mostert could be the guy who salts this game away if the Dolphins get up early. Honestly, I might have to raise him higher than this because more than I think about it, I probably would start him as like a top 20 back this week. So definitely a pretty solid option if you need him. Running back 23 for me is Jahmyr Gibbs. And Gibbs, I'm a little bit worried about for a couple reasons. Number one, he popped up on the injury report with a hamstring injury today, which is never a good sign on a Friday. The workload, in my opinion, isn't going to get much better anytime soon. Although, as a young player, we expect him to get more productive. We expect him to get more work as the season goes along. David Montgomery is playing well right now, and he's not going away just because Jahmyr Gibbs was drafted as highly as he was. Dan Campbell's kind of an old school coach, and I think the early down work and the red zone work is going to stay going to the big back. I just think that's what's going to happen, and Gibbs just simply isn't being used like, Devon Achane, for example, a guy that's, you get 15 to 20 opportunities in space as a receiver on outside zone type of runs. That's how he should be being used, and that's not really what's happening here. So with Jahmyr Gibbs, he's still on a team that's implied for 27 points in this game. So he's a low-end RB2 for me in this game against the Carolina Panthers, but I am pretty concerned about Jahmyr Gibbs to the point that if I got a big-time performance out of him, I might actually consider selling him, even though I'm usually on the path of, buying young running backs as the season goes along. This is the one instance where I think David Montgomery is going to be a pest the entire season. So running back 24 for me, closing out this tier, is Miles Sanders. Groin injuries are very tricky, so something to keep in mind with Miles Sanders is that if he has a big game this week, maybe you want to sell high on him. And he also has a high chance for re-aggravation of the injury that he's been dealing with, according to a lot of the fantasy docs I've looked at. Make sure that Chuba Hubbard is rostered in your league because at any point in time, I think Miles Sanders could re-aggravate this injury, and we could be looking at a situation where Chuba Hubbard is a workhorse. So Miles Sanders, if you guys have him on your roster, I think he's a fine low-end RB2 this week, but it's not a very good game script. The Lions are pretty good against the run, and I'm worried that, Chuba Hubbard out-snapping Miles Sanders last week could be more to come, knowing that Miles Sanders is still banged up, and I think both guys are pretty comparable from a talent perspective. In fact, Chuba Hubbard has actually been much better than Miles Sanders on a per-touch basis this year. So something to keep in mind with Miles Sanders. You're kind of stuck with him. You can't really sell at this point in time, but maybe if you use him as a throw-in to tier up, you could probably offload him pretty quick here. So moving on to the flex plays, and I will say these guys are going to factor in more than ever because, like I said, we do have 5 players on bye. Running back 25 for me in my rankings is Najee Harris. I wish I could bury him lower than this, to be honest. It's a brutal matchup, probably a bad game script, and his quarterback is either playing hurt if Kenny Pickett suits up, or it's Mitch Trubisky starting for the Pittsburgh Steelers at quarterback. But it's a divisional game. Anything can happen. Najee Harris, not a great workload that we're getting out of him. It looks like Jaylen Warren has eaten more and more as we go into the season, to the point that this is borderline a 50-50 split. It's like a 55-45 split right now. So not great news for Najee Harris, but if you have bye weeks, you probably have to put him in your lineup. Running back 27 on the week for me is Khalil Herbert, who played last night, of course. Nothing crazy. He had like 75 yards, got a great workload. With Roschon Johnson getting a concussion, he saw a little bit more work, but he actually did get banged up himself in that game. Fields really ate into his carries. I don't know why they haven't been using him more as a runner, because Justin Fields, it's his best attribute as a quarterback. He's virtually unstoppable when he's running the football. So keep that in mind with Khalil Herbert. Running back 27, though, for me in my rankings is Gus Edwards. It's a great workload this past week that we saw from him. Also a really good matchup here. Time of possession will be the key here. Like I said, with Kenny Pickett already being bad, and if he's unhealthy in addition to him being bad and this offensive scheme being bad, that sounds like a recipe for a lot of Ravens rush attempts. And if that happens, we could get a lot of Gus Edwards work in this game and maybe some short fields if there's turnovers or whatever. Workload may be a bit inflated from last week because Justice Hill was coming off a toe injury and he was, kind of limited in that game. But we should see a good representation of what the Ravens want to do in this backfield going forward now that Gus Edwards and Justice Hill and Melvin Gordon should all be active for this game in full goes. Running back 28 for me is Tyler Algier. The Houston Texans are a really tough defense to pass against, but they are a bottom 5 run defense. And I think knowing what's happened to the Falcons the last couple weeks, they've been blown out by the Jags, blown out by the Lions. I think Arthur Smith is going to want to get back to what he does best, and that's run the ball with Bijan Robinson, run the ball with Tyler Algier. And the Texans, like I said, are very difficult to pass against, but they are susceptible to the run game. Algier's been virtually phased out of the offense because of some of these negative game scripts, as well as Bijan Robinson's emergence. But this should be a better game script. I think this will be a closer game, and I don't think the Falcons will get down as big as we've seen them. But I mean, Desmond Ritter's been really bad, and if he starts to play poorly again, it should be Taylor Heineke time, and we should get a quarterback replacement. At least I hope so, for the sake of all my Bijan shares. So running back 29, we have Jaylen Warren. With Warren, you kind of just have to hope for a big play and hope that, the Ravens let up a long one or whatever the case is, because they're really stingy against the run. And ideally, you don't have to start a guy like Jaylen Warren for instance, if this is a flex decision, I would probably start 45 to 50 wide receivers over my RB29 in Jaylen Warren this week, because, this is where the running backs are starting to fall off, right? We have a couple guys on bye. It's getting pretty ugly at this point in time. Closing out this area, we have Jaleel McLaughlin, who my guess would be that Javonte Williams is out for this game, as I talked about in the will they play section. McLaughlin is an explosive back, but I'm not flying to run this guy out into my lineup because he's an undersized guy. I think Samaje Perine will be heavily involved. It's a man matchup. It's a man offense. He's fine if you guys have bye weeks, but I probably don't want to start Jaleel McLaughlin if I don't have to. And then some of the guys that are like deeper league flex plays, if you guys are interested or if you are just totally screwed at running back and you need to throw somebody out there, I think Tajay Spears is a decent bet. With the Colts playing at home, they could get down early, and we've seen when that happens, Tajay Spears outsnaps Derrick Henry. Chuba Hubbard, like I said, Miles Sanders is banged up. Maybe we get closer to a 50-50 split. Justice Hill, again, a very similar situation in Baltimore. I think it's a good game script for the run. Justice Hill should be more involved. A.J. Dillon also probably going to be pretty involved in this game plan as well, even though he hasn't been playing well, because Aaron Jones is still dealing with the hamstring injury. He's still limited in practice right now. And then Kenny Gainwell is also a decent flyer as well. High over-under game. Maybe DeAndre Swift has some trouble getting it done on the ground, and they have to throw the ball a little bit more, and Kenneth Gainwell has shown that he's been more the 2-minute drill back, more the long down and distance back. So if you got some value from this video, if I helped you set your running back lineups and you got some value, like I said, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here, if you want my weekly rankings, if you want my rest of season rankings, if you want our dynasty rankings, all of that is available on our site, flockfantasy.com. You can use the promo code FSE to get you 30% off. If you sign up annually, you'll get a free Zoom consultation with one of us, and you'll also get 6 months for free if you're interested in that. Definitely check it out, link down below in the pinned comment. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.